Well, welcome, folks. The polar vortex has hit 20 degrees below zero in Chicago. And when the wind blows off the lake, it feels like 50 degrees below zero.
Man, that's cold. Well, the brutally cold weather is putting millions of people at risk. 85% of the country is facing temperatures at or below freezing. Charlene Aaron has more.
The Arctic winter cold is tightening its grip on the upper plains and Midwest, seeing the coldest temperatures in decades.
In some places, possibly the coldest in recorded history.
Take a look at this Arctic blast and where we'll see temperatures running about 20 to 40 degrees below normal for this time of year. And it's normally cold up into the Great Lakes and into Ohio, the Ohio Valley, back into the Midwest. But we're running 20 to 40 degrees below normal for this time of year.
Schools and offices are closed, and even the U.S. Postal Service has suspended mail delivery in 11 states. Lakes and rivers frozen solid. Ice and snow wreaking havoc on the roads.
Reported multiple semis, at least 10 vehicles involved.
Can't predict where you're going to slide.
In Chicago, the frigid cold paralyzing railroad tracks, forcing Amtrak to cancel all services in the city. It's so cold that city officials had to set train tracks on fire to keep the metal from contracting.
Yeah, this is just really cold.
Authorities warning drivers be prepared.
I would suggest getting a blanket, extra set of clothing, maybe an alternative battery source for your phone.
In North Dakota, temperatures plunged as low as -26, with wind chills as low as -62. It's going to get worse tonight.
We've got the record-challenging cold for the overnight hours. Milwaukee, our forecast is -20. The record was -15 set way back in 1899.
Governors in several states declaring emergencies. In a desperate attempt to get the homeless off the streets, Chicago is turning buses into makeshift warming centers. Emergency rooms are seeing an increase in cases of frostbite and bracing for more in the days to come.
Officials are warning residents to not only bundle up, but to consider not going out at all until the dangerous temperatures pass. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
You know, there are some who think that global warming is the main threat to our society. They need to go to Chicago. Well, Joe Bastardi is chief meteorologist for Weather Bell Analytics. Joe's with us now. Joe, you predicted it. Did you think it was going to get this cold, buddy?
Well, in the preseason, we were talking about the idea for extremes. By the way, it's so cold, I've pulled out the sweater vest. So I'm not wearing a suit today because I think the sweater vest gives a warmer presentation, so to speak. But in any case, the cold, look, folks, the weather is a movie. The problem is if you just walk in the snapshot, you don't understand what happened before. This has been setting itself up for quite some time. As a matter of fact, back in the preseason, back in August, we were talking about the threat of extremes this winter overall because of what we saw lining up. And in early December, there was an event that started occurring that telegraphed this. The same kind of thing happened. There was an event that went on, believe it or not, in the Indian Ocean. We call it the Madden-Julian Oscillation. It set off a stratospheric warming event. We saw that happen in 1965 in late December. It happened late December of 84 and 93. Guess what happened a month after that? Well, the blizzard of 66 in the east where the polar vortex went in over New York State. 1985, the Ronald Reagan inaugural outbreak, Chicago's coldest ever, -27. This is very similar to that. And, of course, the 1994 outbreak, the last time it hit -20 in Chicago. So you see, all this was setting up before, and it actually points to what's going to be going on in the future here over the next couple of months. We're going to get what we call a bounce-back warm-up, and then the cold is going to start pressing again. In February into March, even though the southeast is going to be warm for the first 10 days or so of February after we get rid of this cold, much of the United States is going to suffer well into March this year with a lot of cold and a lot of snow. At least that's my opinion.
What about this whole thing about global warming? Does this have anything to do with all this natural fossil fuel polluting the atmosphere or any of that stuff?
Well, I don't believe that. First of all, CO2, in my opinion, is not a pollutant. You exhale and I exhale 100 times more CO2 than we inhale. In fact, plants love that. I was walking by a tree the other day. It started hugging me because of the CO2 that's coming out of my mouth, but among other things. But the fact is that if you've got to ask yourself a question. If in 1985 it got this cold, or there are other extremes that occurred before, how did they occur, and why were they being caused by natural causes, and why is this not a natural cause? Look, if you go back and look at the weather and see what the weather's done in the majesty of the atmosphere, you realize how small humans are compared to that, and we probably have very, 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 very little to do with it.
What about the talk about sunspot, that there are less sunspots? Does that have any effect on our weather?
I think in the long term, it may have some effect. But look, these people, that's the other thing. Oh, well, this is a sign of a little ice age. The little ice age, and we've been pulling out this since the 1700s and early 1800s, there were 200 years of a lack of sunspot activity, okay, that went into that. So what happens is we've had 200 years of high sunspot activity. If you want to play the solar card, where's the energy from that stored? Likely in the oceans. The oceans have 99.9% of the thermal capacity of the atmosphere, folks. So they are really, in the shorter term, on the order of decades, controlling the shooting match. The oceans are cyclically warm now, pumps extra water vapor in the air, and what happens? You get the weather to do what the weather's doing. This is all part of nature. And what's fascinating is Dr. William Gray, the late Dr. William Gray, the hurricane expert, predicted this stuff to happen back in the 70s. I haven't read a book my dad gave me in 1963. I was 8 years old. My dad's a meteorologist. He wanted to push me toward meteorology. Talking about natural climate change, I am watching this happen right in front of my eyes. It's nature at work. Whether man has something to do with it or not, how can you tell given what's happened before?
Well, you don't turn down your industry then, and you don't join the Tokyo or other conglomerate that wants to limit America's industrial capacity then. That's not a factor.
I wouldn't do that, especially if you look. The real hockey sticks of the fossil fuel era are the increase in life expectancy, the amount of people on the planet, and personal wealth has gone up. The fact is, life was short and brutal before the fossil fuel age, and a lot of folks say, look, I respect people's opinions. I understand. I don't have a monopoly on tomorrow, but a lot of the things you're able to see today are because of what happened yesterday, what got us here today. Not everything is horrible that happened yesterday, including the fossil fuel era. You know, I believe that if we were really serious about this thing, we'd be going more toward nuclear power. It's not Jane Fonda China syndrome anymore, folks. This is the United States in 2018. If you want to take this out of the air, you want to have a big argument about it, try to go more nuclear. We could cut down on these other things and make it a moot point.
Hey, Joe, one last question. With 3 more months of winter left, what do you see coming?
Well, I see a very cold February and March for most of the United States. I think down there at Virginia Beach, February 15th to March 14th is going to be very cold and stormy down there. The Southeast will get a break here over the next 8 to 10 days. Very, very cold air pours into the central western part of the United States next week and starts forcing the issue further south and east. We've got this bounce-back warm-up, we call it. It actually happened. Last time the so-called polar vortex, I call it Colmageddon, okay, because it's stronger than the old polar vortex back in 14. It was 48 in Chicago 5 days after it was minus 16. You're going to see the same kind of warm-up, but then cold air pushes again, folks, and is going to dominate the weather pattern much of February to March. At least that's what I think. I could be wrong. We're going to find out.
All right, Joe, you're terrific. Thanks. Come back, please. We'd love to hear from you. Joe Bastardi, what do you think of that?
You invite me back, I'll be back.
All right, good.
Well, I thought it was funny that the tree hugged him, and I can believe it. He's a funny guy.
He really.
But he makes a lot of sense,
Well, he
too.
said, get your skis out for skiing on Mount Trashmore. He told us this was going to happen, though, because of what he's noticed in the oceans. And he saw the trend coming.
Yeah.
So it isn't a little ice age, and it's not global warming. And all this business, we want to control our industry. That's nothing but a massive socialist concept to limit America's production. That's all that amounts to. I know people think, well, global warming is such a big deal. Listen to Joe Bastardi. He knows what he's talking about. And he said that human beings, their burning of fossil fuel is a minuscule thing in relation to the overall. I think the sunspots are the big deal, and the sunspot activity has been very reduced, but it may take a long while. Well, all he's saying is it's going to get warmer in Chicago in another few weeks, and it's going to get cold as the dickens right after that, so we'll see what happens. Well, in other news, China and Russia are growing threats on the cyber war battlefield. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. Russia and China are capable of launching cyber attacks that could disrupt electric grids and gas pipelines in the United States. That's according to a worldwide threat assessment the U.S. intelligence community delivered to Congress. The report says China has the ability to launch cyber attacks that cause localized, temporary disruptive effects on critical infrastructure, such as disruption of a natural gas pipeline for days to weeks right here in the United States. The report also says Moscow is staging cyber attack assets to disrupt or damage U.S. civilian and military infrastructure during a crisis. In those same hearings, National Intelligence Director Dan Coats warned that North Korea and ISIS are still viable threats to the nation. Coats said despite North Korea's pledge to get rid of nuclear weapons, the rogue nation is unlikely to dismantle its arsenal. Turning to the Middle East, Coats said despite incurring great setbacks, ISIS is still a deadly terrorist threat.
While ISIS is nearing territorial defeat in Iraq and Syria, the group has returned to its guerrilla warfare roots while continuing to plot attacks and direct its supporters worldwide.
And that intelligence agencies deliver that threat report each year to Congress. Pat?
You know, I have said on this program, and I'll say it again, our critical infrastructure is at risk. We must harden the grid. It's not going to cost but a few $1 billion. But what we're looking at is a major problem. If there is a thermonuclear explosion in the atmosphere, it can fry all the electrical connections all across the country. We're looking at cyber threats that will cut off the power grid. Why not do something about it now? I mean, all this talk about the wall and everything, I mean, it's nice, but it doesn't hold a candle to the threat that we're facing. And also, it's interesting, these intelligence people were saying things that apparently contradicted the president. And they said ISIS really isn't all that bad. And he said they're defeated, and the intelligence guys said, no, they're not. And they also said North Korea is not about to denuclearize. When they talk about denuclearization, do you know what the Koreans mean? They mean the United States will withdraw its nuclear forces, its planes and our ships, and its satellites and all the stuff that we have around North Korea. We'll take them out of the equation. Then the Korean peninsula will be denuclearized. That's what they mean. But these intelligence experts says there is no way that Kim Jong-un is going to sit down with President Trump and give away his nuclear arsenal. He's just not going to do it. John?
Well, Pat, President Trump's decision to pull American troops out of Syria has led to a power struggle among some bad actors in the Middle East. CBN's Chris Mitchell traveled to northeast Syria to learn more about what this might mean for the region and beyond.
After President Trump's announcement of a pullout of U.S. troops, a geopolitical tug-of-war began over northeast Syria. Who wins will determine the future and fate of the Middle East. The main players are a threatening lineup. Turkey's President Erdogan, Russian President Putin, Syrian President Assad, and Iran's Supreme Leader Khamenei, all wanting to fill any void left by the exit of U.S. troops. Their target? Leaders of a new, largely democratic government inside northeast Syria. It includes Christians, Arabs, Kurds, and other ethnic groups. They say Trump's surprise decision left them at the mercy of the larger nations around them.
The people in this area are very frightened by the decision of the American pullout because a lot of countries and militias are coveting the region east of the Euphrates to replace the American. Russia, the Assad regime, Iran and Turkey, or the Nusra Front that have declared publicly that they will support Turkey on their attack of the east of the Euphrates.
The decision by President Trump for the withdrawal of the U.S. troops was a decision not at a good time, and it wasn't coordinated with us if we are ready or not ready. This decision had really negative consequences on the Council.
Most see Turkey as their main threat.
Turkey is so dangerous because it has been the old and the new enemy for our people from the before the revolution and now. Erdogan wants to take our area to make it to him, related with the Turkish government.
Then Syria and Russia came courting, hoping to build a relationship. Yet if this new government were to align with Assad and Putin, the regional chess game could increase the threat to Israel. That's because an alliance between this newly formed government and Syria could provide Iran with a much larger route to transport weapons and supplies to Hezbollah in Lebanon. This would complete Iran's desire to build a land bridge to the Mediterranean. Earlier this month, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo explained what happens when the U.S. leaves a power vacuum.
We learned that when America retreats, chaos often follows. When we neglect our friends, resentment builds. And when we partner with our enemies, they advance.
If the Americans go out and there's no agreement on the political front, for sure that's going to cause a lot of chaos in the area, and that chaos will cause a lot of conflict in the region.
While it remains to be seen who will win this tug of war and fill the void here, all indications are whoever prevails will help dictate the future course of the Middle East, Israel, and perhaps the world. It's all part of a new emerging Middle East. We'll have more reports here from northeast Syria, including what these new developments mean for Christians in the region. Some are openly talking about the possibility of another genocide. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, northeast Syria.
Thanks, Chris. Pat, so much hangs in the balance with this current power struggle.
The withdrawal of troops so hastily was not carefully thought out. But here's the deal. The Kurds are the largest people group in the world that don't have their own homeland. They have an independent country called Kurdistan. They have 36 million people in that area. It takes up northern Iraq, it takes up northern Syria, and the Kurds have been our longtime friend. They are pro-democracy, they're pro-American, and they're pro-freedom. Now, all that the president would have to do is to recognize that this is a homeland for the Kurds, just like what was called the Balfour Declaration declared that there should be a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. So what the president says is it is the opinion of my administration that we would recognize an independent Kurdistan in northern Iraq and northern Syria, the land that they already are occupying. And that vacuum that Chris was talking about will then be closed. And the next thing the president should do is direct the Secretary of Defense to provide the necessary weapons and arms, and then to tell the other people that an unprovoked attack on this new Kurdistan would be considered an attack on the United States of America. And then we have air support that would be in defense of those Kurds. It would be a brilliant move, and it wouldn't take any American troops, and it wouldn't cost a great deal, because if we walk out of that thing, the resulting chaos is going to be genocide. The Christians will be massacred. The Yazidis who've fought so long against ISIS will be massacred. And particularly the Turks can't wait to destroy the Kurds. They already did it, if you remember, to the Armenians. The Turks are brutal, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy the Kurds. This is a blow that the president he doesn't have to have the Senate approval. He doesn't have to have the United Nations approval. He doesn't have to have anybody's approval. All he's got to do is say, this is the Trump manifesto, that there is a homeland for the Kurdish people. And all of a sudden, Iran is blocked, as they would try to move and have a land bridge all the way to the Mediterranean. You stop that. It keeps the Russians and the Turks from taking over that area, and it blocks Assad and Syria from coming in and butchering them. But for the Christians there, they say, is not President Trump a Christian? Why is he allowing this to happen to us? That's what they said to Chris Mitchell when he was over there. Why is a Christian president allowing this Muslim dictator to destroy us? Why are we allowing the communists from Russia to come in and destroy us? Why? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the answer is we shouldn't ever do it. So if I would urge you on one thing, write the president and say, please stop the genocide of the Christians in Syria and in Iraq. Do something. And this is the easiest course. It is so intelligent, and there's no reason for the president not to do it. He doesn't have to ask anybody's permission. He can do it with a stroke of the pen. He's worried about how does he get money for the wall. He's got to have Congress. How does he do something else? He's got to have Congress. What about shutting down the government? He's got to have Congress. What about giving a State of the Union address? He's got to be invited by Congress. But this time he can do it on his own. And it would be brilliant. The Trump manifesto, here you now have a president who has said Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and go down in history as the one who did that and recognized that. And then to be the one who provided a homeland for the Kurds with the Trump manifesto, it would be a fabulous thing to go down in history. Whew. So much
Trump
for that.
manifesto.
Wouldn't that be great? I mean, you know, instead of, he's the man who built the wall. I mean, like, who cares? And he's the man who had a crooked lawyer working for him and paid off hookers or whatever. I mean, really.
Yeah. Hopefully Trump's watching right now. And he's taking notes.
I wouldn't take book on such a thing, but maybe one of his aides is. All right.